My in-laws called me cheap for buying a simple engagement ring, so I ended the engagement, sold the ring, and took my ex's best friend on vacation. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and I used to think love was simple. Two people who chose each other no matter what the world thought. When I decided to propose to my girlfriend Hannah, I didn't have a huge savings account or fancy plans. What I did have was months of sacrifice, skipped meals, late nights at my desk all to afford a ring that symbolized something real. It wasn't the biggest diamond, but it was honest. I wanted her to look at it and see me steady, loyal, and ready to spend my life with her. The day I proposed, the world seemed to line up perfectly. The sun was setting over the park where we'd first met 3 years ago, and the air had that golden warmth that makes everything feel timeless. My hands were shaking as I knelt down on the same patch of grass where she'd once spilled her coffee all over me. She laughed back, then said it was fate. Now, when I opened the ring box, I saw that same sparkle in her eyes. She said yes, her voice trembling, and threw her arms around me. For a second, it felt like every struggle I'd faced had been worth it. We sat on the park bench afterward, watching the sky fade into pink. She rested her head on my shoulder, and I thought, this is it. This is home. But then she turned the ring in her fingers and said softly, "It's beautiful." My mom might have expected something a bit more elegant, though. The words hit me harder than I expected. I smiled to hide the sting, brushing it off as a joke, but deep down something shifted. I told myself not to overthink it, that she loved me, and that was enough. Still, as the light faded and her phone buzzed with her mother's name, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this perfect moment had just been cracked open. The following week, Hannah invited me over to her parents' house for dinner, a small family celebration, she called it. I remember standing outside their front door, holding a bottle of mid-range wine I'd bought after Googling best dinner wines for engagement dinners, hoping to make a good impression. Their home was immaculate white stone columns, a manicured lawn, and a driveway filled with cars that probably cost more than my entire savings. As soon as the door opened, I felt the difference between our worlds. Her mother, Claudia, greeted me with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "So you're the man who finally convinced my daughter to settle down?" she said, her tone wrapped in polite sarcasm. Her father, Richard, shook my hand but looked me over like he was assessing an employee rather than welcoming a future son-in-law. I tried to stay calm, to remind myself that first impressions can be misleading. Dinner was uncomfortable from the start. The table looked like something out of a magazine's silver cutlery, expensive wine glasses, and food I could barely pronounce. Conversation flowed easily between them until Claudia asked to see the ring. I handed it over, proud of what it represented. She turned it under the chandelier light, squinting slightly before saying, "Oh, it's quaint." Richard chuckled, muttering, "Some men like to start small, I suppose." Hannah gave an awkward laugh and said, "He's just practical," like she was defending me. But the words came out wrong. Practical. That word echoed in my head all night like an insult wearing a polite disguise. I felt my chest tighten, my fork trembling slightly as I pretended not to care. When dessert came, I barely tasted it. Every comment, every glance between her parents, made me feel like an outsider at my own celebration. I told myself they'd warm up eventually. But as Hannah smiled across the table, trying to keep the peace, I caught her eyes, flicking toward her mother's approving nod, and I realized whose opinion she cared about more. In the days after that dinner, something in Hannah shifted. She wasn't cruel, just distant in small, quiet ways. The kind of change you can't pinpoint but feel in your gut. She started talking more about future plans and impressions, words that suddenly had a different weight. One evening, as we sat on the couch, she brought it up casually like it was nothing. "You know," she said, turning the engagement ring slowly around her finger, "some jewelers let you trade in rings for something a little more traditional." I paused the movie we were watching and looked at her. "What's wrong with this one?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She smiled, tight and nervous. "Nothing's wrong. It's just, Mom thinks people might not understand it. She's worried they'll assume you couldn't afford better." That last sentence landed like a punch I didn't see coming. I tried to laugh it off, saying, well, she's not marrying me, right? But Hannah didn't laugh back. Instead, she sighed and looked away. You don't get it. My family's used to certain standards. I just don't want people talking. I sat there in silence, trying to process the fact that the woman I loved was embarrassed by something I had worked months to afford. I thought about every double shift, every night I skipped dinner to save a little more. To me, the ring was proof of effort and love. To her, it was a source of shame. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the words trade and replaying over and over in my head. I wanted to believe it was just pressure from her parents, not who she really was. But the next morning, when I overheard her whispering on the phone to her mom, "He doesn't understand how appearances matter," I realized something I didn't want to admit. Maybe she cared more about their approval than my love. 2 weeks later, Hannah's parents hosted our engagement party at their home, a sprawling estate that looked like it belonged on the cover of a luxury magazine. I told myself this was a chance to start over, to show her family that I wasn't some broke kid playing grown-up. I wore my best suit, brought a small gift for her parents, and even rehearsed polite small talk on the drive there. But the moment I stepped inside, I realized I was walking into a performance I hadn't been cast for. The house buzzed with laughter and champagne glasses clinking. Everyone was dressed like they were attending a gala, not an engagement celebration. I stood beside Hannah, smiling, shaking hands with people whose names I immediately forgot. Every compliment about how lucky Hannah was to find a man who seemed so humble felt more like an insult dressed in silk. When someone asked to see the ring, I watched the same scene from dinner replay in slow motion, polite smiles, forced praise, and subtle glances of pity. Then her father made a toast. He raised his glass and said, "Here's to our daughter, who deserves the world, and to her fiancé, who's doing his best to catch up to it." Laughter erupted. Actual laughter. My stomach twisted as the sound filled the room. I caught Hannah's face through the blur of people. She wasn't laughing, but she wasn't stopping them either. She just looked uncomfortable, torn. After the toast, I excused myself and stepped out into the garden. The cold air hit my face, sharp and grounding. I could still hear their voices echoing from inside, mocking, polished, empty. I stared at the reflection of the house lights on the pool water, realizing how small I felt in that world. When Hannah finally came outside, I expected her to apologize. Instead, she crossed her arms and said, "You really shouldn't have walked out." My parents thought that was rude. I looked at her, searching for the woman I proposed, the one who said yes because of love, not approval. But all I saw was someone who cared more about appearances than us. And that was the first moment I truly felt alone in our relationship. The car ride home after the party was dead silent. The kind of silence that hums louder than any argument could. I gripped the steering wheel, my jaw clenched, every word her father said, looping in my mind like a cruel replay. I wanted to believe Hannah would break the silence first, that she'd say something to make it right. But she just stared out the window, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "You didn't say a word," I said quietly. She blinked, not looking up. "About what?" I laughed bitterly. "About your dad publicly mocking me in front of 50 people. She sighed, putting her phone down. "You're overreacting, Mark. He was just joking. That's how my family is, they tease. Don't make it a big deal." I stared at her in disbelief. "A joke?" "They laughed at me, Hannah. At us. Do you even realize how humiliating that was?" Her tone sharpened. "It's always about you, isn't it? You can't handle a little pressure, and now you're playing the victim." Those words hit harder than anything her parents said. "Pressure," I repeated. "You call being ridiculed for not being rich enough pressure?" She folded her arms. "You just don't get it, do you? My family has expectations. They've built a reputation, and I can't pretend that doesn't matter." For a moment, I couldn't even respond. The girl who once said she loved how real I was now embarrassed by the same thing she used to admire. "If you're ashamed of me, then why say yes?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer. She just turned back toward the window, her reflection in the glass, cold and unreadable. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was final. When we got to her apartment, when we got out without saying goodbye, I sat there for a long time, watching her walk away, realizing that the woman I thought I knew had slowly been replaced by someone who measured love in carrots and status. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe I'd been proposing to an idea of her that never really existed. A few days after that argument, I decided to pull back. I didn't text or call. I needed space to think, to figure out if this relationship was worth fighting for anymore. But before I could make sense of anything, I got an unexpected call from Miyahana's best friend and maid of honor. We weren't particularly close, but we'd always gotten along. Her voice was soft, hesitant, almost apologetic. "Mark," she said, "I know this is awkward, but I need to tell you something." My heart immediately dropped. "What is it?" There was a pause on the line long enough to make my stomach twist. "Hannah's been talking about you," she said. "About the ring. The money. She's been saying some pretty cruel things. Tried to brush it off at first. I know her family doesn't like me much. I get it." But Mia's next words hit like a hammer. "It's not just them, Mark. She's been joining in. Laughing with her mom about how you settled for a cheap ring. There's even a group chat. They joke about you being the budget fiancé." My chest went tight, my throat dry. "You're serious?" I whispered. "Dead serious," Mia replied. Then she sighed and said something that stuck with me forever. "You don't deserve that. You're one of the kindest guys I've ever met. You worked hard for that ring." And she turned it into a punchline. She sent me screenshots, not because she wanted to hurt me, but because she thought I needed to see the truth. And there it was in black and white, Hannah and her mother mocking the ring. Calling me a poor man's dreamer. The girl who once cried when I proposed had reduced that memory to a running joke. I sat there, staring at those messages until the screen blurred. Something inside me cracked. Not just heartbreak, but humiliation, betrayal, disbelief, all tangled together. I'd given her everything I had, and she'd sold it for approval points. Mia's voice came through again, quieter now. "I'm sorry, Mark. I just thought you should know." That night I didn't sleep. I just sat there in the dark, my phone still glowing in my hand, realizing that the woman I thought I loved had been laughing behind my back for months. And for the first time, I didn't feel sad, I felt done. The next morning, I woke up with that heavy, hollow feeling that comes when reality finally sinks in. I couldn't pretend anymore. Every text, every glance from the past few months now had a different meaning. The laughter, the avoidance, the silence, it all fit together like puzzle pieces of a truth I didn't want to see. But now that I had, I couldn't unsee it. I drove to Hannah's apartment without telling her I was coming. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing this conversation would end everything. When she opened the door, she smiled faintly like nothing was wrong. "Hey," she said, "you're early." I stepped inside without a word and placed my phone on the counter. "We need to talk," her expression faltered. "About what?" I opened the screenshots Mia sent me and turned the screen toward her. Her eyes widened for a split second before she looked away, jaw tightening. "Where did you get those?" she asked. "Doesn't matter," I said quietly. "I just want to hear it from you. Did you really laugh about me with your mom? About the ring?" She hesitated, then shrugged, forcing a small laugh. "It was just banter, Mark. Don't be dramatic. Mia's clearly stirring things up because she's jealous." I said, disbelief rising in my voice. "She's the only one who had the decency to tell me the truth. You and your mother mocked, meeped what I gave you." Her face hardened. "You're making this bigger than it is." "My mom just wants the best for me," I said, voice shaking now. "Your mom wants status? And you want her approval more than you ever wanted, my love." For a moment, the room went silent. Then she said coldly, "If that's how you feel, maybe we shouldn't get married." I stared at her, realizing she meant it not as an ultimatum, but as an escape. I nodded slowly. "You're right," I whispered. I pulled the ring off her finger, set it on the counter, said the last words I ever spoke to her. "I'm not walking away from love. I'm walking away from disrespect." Then I left, closing the door behind me, and for the first time in months, I felt lighter even if my heart was breaking. The days after the breakup were a blur of silence and tension. I didn't tell anyone what really happened. I figured it was between me and Hannah, and I didn't want to start a war. But she did. Within a week, whispers started circulating through mutual friends, coworkers, even people I barely knew. I found out through a friend's text that Hannah had been telling everyone. I couldn't afford a proper engagement and that I'd overreacted when she tried to help. At first, I tried to ignore it. But then she posted a photo of her bare hand on social media with the caption, "Sometimes it's better to lose a ring than lose your standards." The comments were brutal, her friends laughing, her family chiming in with smug heart emojis. People I'd once had dinner with were now making jokes about bargain love stories. It spread like wildfire. Then came the worst part. A coworker showed me screenshots of a group chat Hannah's friends had made, sharing the story as if it were some rom-com gone wrong. "Cheap fiance, meltdown," one caption said. My stomach sank. I felt exposed, humiliated, and powerless. At work, whispers followed me everywhere. Even the few people who didn't believe her version still looked at me with pity, which was somehow worse. I'd always taken pride in being private and hardworking, and now my name was a punchline. Nights became harder lying awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling that sinking weight in my chest that wouldn't go away. One night, I drove to the park where I'd proposed. The same bench. The same spot where she'd said yes. The memory hit like a knife how genuine it had felt, how real it seemed back then. I sat there under the dim park light, staring at my empty hands, realizing I wasn't mourning the end of a relationship. I was mourning the illusion of love I thought I had. That was my rock bottom. Not the breakup, not the humiliation. It was the realization that the woman I loved never existed, not the way I believed she did. Rock bottom has a strange kind of silence to it, like the world goes on without you, and you're just watching from a distance. That's where I lived for weeks. I stopped checking social media, stopped answering calls, even from friends who meant well. Every reminder of Hannah felt like reopening the same wound, but eventually pain runs out of fuel. One morning I woke up and realized I was tired not just of being sad, but of giving her and her family any more power over my peace. I threw myself into work. I started staying late, taking extra projects, anything to distract my mind. Slowly, the noise around me faded. A few coworkers who'd believed the rumors saw the truth over time. One even told me, "You didn't lose much, man. You dodged a nightmare." For the first time in months, I laughed. And meant it. Then, out of nowhere, Mia reached out again. She said she'd been checking in on me from a distance, just giving me space. We met for coffee, and what started as a simple catch-up turned into a long, honest conversation about everything: love, self-worth, and the way people weaponize status. She said something I'll never forget. "You were never the problem. Mark, you just gave the wrong person everything she didn't deserve." Her words hit deeper than any apology ever could. For the first time, someone actually saw Mina as a victim, but as someone who'd survived something ugly. Over the next few weeks, we talked more, mostly as friends. There was no flirting, no pretending. It was just two people, being real. Little by little, the heaviness in my chest started to fade. I could breathe again. I even started sleeping through the night. I wasn't healed yet, but I was standing. And that, I realized, was a start. That's when I decided I needed closure, not from Hannah, but from what she represented, and I knew exactly where to find it. It took me almost 2 months to finally do it. I'd kept the engagement ring in a small box on my desk, buried under some old bills and receipts, too sentimental to throw away, too painful to look at. But one evening, after finishing a long shift, I opened that drawer and just stared at it. The same ring that once symbolized love now felt like a weight holding me back. I turned it over in my hand, tracing the edges, remembering how hard I'd worked to buy it, how proud I'd been. For a moment, I almost felt that old spark of hope, but it faded fast. That ring had seen too much disappointment. It didn't represent love anymore, it represented lessons. Quietly, I put it back in its box, grabbed my jacket, and drove to the same jeweler I'd bought it from. The jeweler, an older man with kind eyes, remembered me. "Didn't think I'd see this ring again," he said softly. I smiled faintly. Neither did I. When he offered the amount for resale, I didn't even haggle. I just nodded, took the cash, and felt something strange like an invisible chain had just snapped. That night, I sat at home staring at the money. It wasn't much, but it felt powerful like a second chance. I paid off the last of my credit card debt, then used what was left for something spontaneous. A trip. Somewhere warm, peaceful, and far from the noise of my past. I booked a flight to Belize, a backpack. Silence. Before confirming the booking, I hesitated, then opened my phone and texted Mia. "Hey, ever wanted to disappear for a while?" A minute later, she replied, "Depends. Are you inviting me?" I grinned for the first time in weeks. Yeah, I think we both deserve a reset. And just like that, the ticket was booked not just for an escape, but for a new beginning I didn't see coming. Bali felt like another world. The air was thick with ocean breeze and freedom, the kind that fills your lungs and makes you forget everything that ever hurt you. Mia and I spent the first few days doing nothing but breathing, laughing, and letting go. There were no fake smiles, no judgment, no whispers about money or rings, just to people who had been through different storms, finally finding calm. One night, as the sun dipped into the horizon, painting the sky gold and violet, Mia said, "You know, it's funny. You lost everything trying to prove your worth to people who never deserved you. And now you're more at peace than they'll ever be." I looked at her, realizing she was right. That trip wasn't about moving on. It was about reclaiming myself. We took photos, not the posed. Perfect, kind Hannah's family would post, but raw, genuine moments. Me laughing with my feet in the sand. Mia, dancing in the rain at a roadside cafe. When she uploaded one photo of us on her Instagram, just me smiling with the ocean behind me, her caption read, "Real value isn't measured in diamonds," blew up overnight. People loved it. Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, praising the message. Some of Hannah's old friends even recognized me and tagged her, asking if I was the cheap fiancé. The irony was poetic. A few days later, I woke up to a flood of missed calls and texts from Hannah. The last one read, "Was that post about me? You're humiliating me publicly. Take it down." I stared at my screen for a long time, then typed back just 8 words. "Now you know how it feels, doesn't it?" Then I turned my phone off, walked to the beach, and let the tide wash over my feet. For the first time in months, I didn't feel anger or heartbreak. I just felt free, but even then, I knew the best revenge wasn't the photo or the post. It was peace. And mine had finally begun. When I got back home, everything felt different. Not because the city had changed, but because I had. The noise that used to echo in my mind what people thought, what her parents said, what she mocked, was gone. I unpacked my bag slowly, putting souvenirs from Bali on the shelf next to my old photo frames. For the first time in a long while, I didn't see reminders of failure. I saw chapters ones I'd survived. A few days later, I stopped by the same park where I'd proposed to Hannah. The leaves were starting to fall, the air cool and quiet. I sat on that familiar bench and watched the sun set again, like it had that day. Only this time, there was no ring in my hand. No pressure. No audience. Just me in peace. I finally understood that the ring had never been too small. The love had me and I kept in touch. We didn't rush anything, didn't force it into some rebound story. What we shared was built on something Hannah's family could never buy: respect. She saw me for who I was, not what I could provide. When she texted me one night, "I'm proud of how far you've come," I smiled. Because I was too. Sometimes people don't just break your heart, they strip away the illusions you built around it. And when those illusions fall, what's left is your truth. Mine was simple. I wasn't cheap. I wasn't unworthy. I just loved the wrong person with everything I had. And in losing her, I found something far more valuable, self-respect, as the sun dipped below the trees. I whispered to myself, never again. Never again would I measure love in price tags or apologies. Never again would I fight for people who saw worth only in numbers. I stood up, took one last look at the horizon, and walked away. This time, not from heartbreak, but toward the life I finally deserved.